Hello everybody, welcome to this training session presented by LearnFront. My name is Sean Payne and I'll be your instructor. This session is part of a collection of training discussing Amazon Web Services and the various resources and service offerings within their cloud infrastructure. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. In this lesson, we're going to talk about Amazon Web Services security best practices as it relates to identity and access management, also known as IAM. So recall, IAM is effectively like your Active Directory service in the cloud. So it's really going to help you protect and secure all of your resources into your Amazon cloud infrastructure, primarily from creating users and groups, associating roles with various instances and resources, and the permissions and authentication mechanisms to either allow or deny actions, and then being able to start, stop, and re-provision resources as well. So one of the key things that we really want to consider in IAM best practices is, if you recall, when you first create in Amazon Web Services an account, the very account you create with is what we call a root account. So because that root account is full administration access to your resources, you really want to consider locking that user down a little bit more securely. So one mechanism of doing that is you can remove and or disable the access keys, which would ultimately disable some of the remote API features for that user's access. Additionally, we want to consider adding MFA or multi-factor authentication for that user, highly recommended. And that would again offer a double protection for that root account, because that clearly is the master account that does have full access to all resources from starting, stopping, deleting, terminating, etc., etc. So there's not only a production implication of your resources, but also a billing implication. So if resources are being spun up without your knowing that, then of course that would be a problem as well. So before you go ahead and do anything like removing or disabling access keys, make sure you back that information up appropriately and equally add contact information appropriately into that account, so that if in the event of a problem, Amazon's Web Services support environment can really help you realign that account properly. Equally, it's a smart idea to, as you create users and all associate them with groups, sometimes you'll create a full admin privileged group. So in this case, you're really going to want to limit the users that have access to that full privileged group, because that would really be no different than the root account to some extent. And equally, applying multi-factor authentication to those full privilege or full admin accounts would be strongly advised. So perhaps limit it to no more than 2 or 3 IAM users if that would fit into your business use case, and again apply an MFA, or you can do that through a hardware or software token. Choice is yours, but nonetheless I would highly advise MFA authentication for any privileged user account. Another great advice, which is general advice inside any data center and enterprise network environment, is to come up with a acceptable use policy, but also a password policy. So you're going to want to define and implement something for password retention and password rotation and all those sorts of things, length, strength of the password, etc., etc. It's advised to use roles for various resources that can provide temporary access and credentials to be able to do various things, rather than storing any kind of access keys or secure access keys into API calls or those sorts of things. It's generally advised to create a role, associate various permissions to that role, and then apply that role to the EC2 or other associated resource that might need that role and associated access. So again, that kind of reduces your footprint of IAM users being and their credentials being stored into resources, and then the role will help associate and protect against those. So highly advised, many benefits to using that. In addition, you can track things through CloudTrail and a variety of other use cases for that. Again, like any other network, you're going to want to apply a least privilege methodology to your users. So if they don't truly need that access or control, then don't provide it to them. So I guess you can, every network is defined a little bit differently, and every policy and use cases is defined a little bit differently. But again, the least privilege methodology is always the best way to ensure proper protection. Smart idea to rotate any passwords, credentials, access keys, secure keys. Again, that would be a part of your password policy, is to also have a rotation process. Choice is yours. Generally advised somewhere between 30 and 90 days. And equally, if you monitor your IAM access and usage, and you discover there's users that haven't been using their credentials or resources in some time, I don't know, maybe 30, 60 days, there's a user that's out there that doesn't necessarily need to be having access any longer, then you might want to consider removing any unused IAM access keys. So those are some of the things you can consider to secure and protect your resources in the cloud using IAM. All right, well, that wraps up this lesson discussing Amazon Web Services security best practices as it relates to identity and access management. I wanted to provide a few resource links to help you continue your investigative study on these topics. I will make them available in a resource section. I hope everybody enjoyed watching this lesson, and happy cloud computing.